On behalf of Council of Islamic Organization of Greater Chicago, I want to welcome you all today to a very informative session on the cultural competency training that will be led by our Dr. Saman. So before we get started, I just want to give a little background of who we are and introduce our organization. And then I will turn it over to Dr. Saman for her presentation. So the Council of Islamic Organization of Greater Chicago is based in Chicago, and this is a leading Muslim organization for last 29 years, proudly serving the membership, which is comprised of Islamic organizations, service organizations, weekend school, and we serve a diverse communities all the way from Africa to South Asia, Middle East, to to the east side. So we have a diverse community that we serve, and we have been proudly serving the community for past 29 years. And as the situation like this occurs, and this is the role of CRGC, is to pull the team together and bring the voices and give voices to the voiceless. And that is why this Afghan Refugee Task Force was created to help the refugees' families. And that's the role of the CRGC, is to collaborate with our partners and bring the community the resources that is needed. We have an office here in Chicago, and we also serve out of the Chicago office to the community, and we have been serving for past 29 years. Our strength and core strength is to facilitate and bring the partnerships together. And one of the reasons why we are having this session today is, as you all are aware of the situation transpiring, the refugees coming into to Chicago. So this task force was tasked to create infrastructure ready to handle the capacity and address the needs of those Afghan refugees. So with that, the task force was created. Dr. Suzanne Ekras and Sister Oge are leading those the task force and the task, and then there's a sub teams who are addressing the housing needs, other needs as they come as they arise. So that is the role of this task force, of to create and facilitate and build the capacity to address the needs. And today's session is one of those led by the task force to bring the training and then share some of the cultural competencies for those who wants to have some training and understanding and sensitivity around the Afghan culture. So with that being said, I want to welcome our trainer, Dr. Saman, and I will turn it over to you, Dr. Saman.
Thank you so much, Brother Khan. I want to thank CIGC and Heartland and anybody who's present on this call who's happy and willing to learn from this, hopefully brief presentation and a bird's eye view. So my name is Saman Hamidi Azar. I'm not sure how much you guys were told about my background, but I do have my doctorate in clinical psychology. And I've been volunteering, working on this Afghan crisis for a couple of months now, specifically as it pertains to the unaccompanied children. In the effort of trying to keep this as concise as possible, I'm going to be going fast because I'm so sorry, but I have a personal stop at 1 o'clock my time in the West Coast. So I'm going to be going as fast as possible. If I'm going too fast, feel free to ping me later. I'll give you my contact information at the very end. And I want us to remember that this is a very bird's eye view of Afghan culture. This is no way a comprehensive cultural competency workshop. This is just a very brief overview of Afghans. But I thought it was important, and that's why I did it, even though it was, it came together very last minute. I really wanted to do this because, as brief as it might be, as bird's eye as it may be, I think it's really important. So I want to thank Sister Sahira for also getting this together. So I'm going to share my screen now. I hope it works. Let's see. Is everybody able to see that? Okay, perfect. Okay, so we went through that. So just briefly speaking, what is cultural competency and what's the mission of this presentation? Cultural competency is a set of attitudes, behaviors, and policies that ensure a system, agency, program, or individual can function effectively and appropriately in diverse cultural settings. Is that going to be possible in this short, less than 1 hour, presentation? Absolutely not. But it's still a bird's eye view of Afghan culture, and I'm not using any academic theories. I'm not giving you any in-depth information because we just don't have the time for it, but it's definitely there and it's definitely important. And it's something that I really think should happen in follow-up sessions. The purpose of this session is to provide your organization a brief yet meaningful understanding of Afghan culture and history in order to foster a good understanding between yourself and your clients. This is just to show you where is Afghanistan located. A lot of people honestly don't know. It's called the heart of Asia because of the location where it's located. So I'll let you guys take a look where it's at. Culture is something that everybody has. Everyone here on this call has some sort of culture. It can be defined as all the ways of life, including arts, beliefs, institutions of a population that are passed down from generation to generation. It's been called a way of life for an entire society. So it includes things like dress, religion, culture, rituals, and art. Putting it very broadly, culture is the software inside of our heads, and our heads act as the hardware. So if anybody's tech savvy, you can figure out how that would impact your life. So a brief agenda. First, we're going to go over a very brief history of Afghans and Afghan history. Then we're going to go through 10 elements of culture. There's much more, but we're going to go through just the 10 brief ones. Third, we're going to talk very briefly. Again, my background is mental health, so I'm going to keep it as brief as possible about trauma, and then some questions you can ask yourself when you're interacting with your clients. And then I'm going to try to leave some time for any question and answers. So getting through Afghan history. So Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It's between Central and South Asia, as we saw earlier. It's bordered by, and this is important to note because it impacts their culture. It's bordered by Pakistan, Iran, China, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And we're very diverse in the way that we look. I'm Afghan, by the way, just in case I didn't mention it earlier. We're very diverse in the way that we look to our ethnic makeup. Because of the strategic location along the Silk Road, it's been home to many military campaigns from all the way back from Alexander the Great to the Mongols, to the British, to the Soviets, and most recently the United States. I agree with that. Somebody has a hot mic, so there you go. It's been nicknamed the graveyard of empires because so many have tried to take over and they haven't been successful. So currently the population of Afghanistan is almost 33 million people. That's not including all the displaced that have left recently. This was, information from before. And the capital city is Kabul with a population of over 4 million. And again, oh my God, this is so blurry, but I'm so sorry. This gives you just a general understanding of the different countries around it and where Kabul is located in relation to them. Beyond the unaccompanied children. So although the most recent Afghan immigrants have come through 3 different avenues, okay? So I know we are going to be, trying to relay this to unaccompanied children, but it's still important to know the communities with that you're going to be a part of with these Afghan refugees. So there's the special immigrant visas, and this might be repetitive for many of you, and I apologize, but I think it's still good to know. So there's 3 different avenues. There's the special immigrant visas, which are called the SIVs. Those are for the people who supported American military operations through different roles, interpretation, translation, cultural advocacy. Then there's the P2 visas who worked with organizations that were based out of the NATO countries. And then there's the humanitarian parolees who are granted entry into the United States for fear of persecution, religious, gender, occupation, sexual orientation. And then individuals are coming alone or with their families, which is what we're having to deal with here. So it was an important note that all of these individuals have faced a traumatic exit from their home country. Many did not want to leave. Therefore, they might not necessarily appear happy. You might want them to Aren't you happy to leave? But it's a traumatic exit. Some have lost loved ones en route. So try to remain cognizant of that when you're discussing the situation with any clients or any individuals you come into contact with. If you ask them if they're happy, for example, somebody had, at the airport, somebody went up to a family and said, I'm, welcome, welcome. Aren't you so happy to be here? And she mentioned, my husband and my child died in a suicide bomb. Why would I be happy? She's distraught. So you want to be careful with, the way you word things and the way you welcome these families or these children into your organization. So there's 14 ethnic groups within Afghanistan. That's a lot, but the four major ones are Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, and Uzbek. And each one of these has different languages, dialects, and unique cultures and traditions. And so this is just to show you how different and diverse Afghans look. There's no one look of being an Afghan. You can, have the blonde hair, blue eyes, or you can have the, like myself, the darker complexions and the darker hair. And so it's a very diverse looks throughout the country. I'm going so fast and I'm so sorry, but I want to make sure I leave time for question and answer. So the 10 elements of culture. And I'm going to try to apply it as much as I can to the unaccompanied children. So language, some estimate that there are between 40 to 59 different languages spoken in Afghanistan, but we're going to focus on the two official ones, which is Dari. Dari is often called Farsi by Afghans. Farsi is actually the dialect that's spoken by Iranians, and Dari is the dialect of Persian that's actually spoken by Afghans. They're very distinct when they're spoken out loud. And so often the native speakers like myself, I have a difficult time understanding Farsi speakers from Iran. And Dari is actually the formal written language. So if you're reading Dari in Farsi, it's exactly the same language. Afghans speak it the way it's written, while Iranians actually have a little bit more slang inserted into it. It's a little bit more of a modern dialect. I hope that makes sense. Pashto is also an Eastern Iranian language, and it's spoken primarily by the native Pashtun of Afghanistan. When seeking interpretation services, it's really, really important to find the right interpreter with the correct language. I'm not saying that Iranians can't be interpreters for Afghans, they can, but you have to know that there's going to be some things that are going to be lost in translation. There are going to be certain nuances that won't be captured by that sort of a translation process. The second element of culture is values and beliefs. Faith, family, and community, just broadly speaking, are such important aspects of Afghan culture. Family, Afghans come from very large multi-generational households. There's some differences among certain tribes or SES, which is socioeconomic status, but generally speaking, Afghanistan and Afghans are a patriarchal society. And again, when I'm speaking about Afghans, I'm speaking so generalized, so please don't take this to mean that every Afghan, every family, every tribe is the same way. And I'm also speaking specifically about Afghans within Afghanistan. So I'm not talking about those of us who are, have immigrated out. And also, it's important to note that when you're speaking to youth, you have to remind them that they're allowed to speak up and ask questions. Because in Afghan culture, oftentimes the youth and children are not invited to, they don't speak unless they're invited to speak. The elders usually provide the permission for the youth to speak. So when you're speaking with them, knowing that you come from a position of authority, it's really important to allow them the permission to speak what they want. The second really important value and belief for Afghans is faith. The Islamic code of conduct, spiritual practices, and mystical beliefs are so central to Afghan culture. Everyday phrases that often incorporate many aspects of faith that you might have heard as well if you're dealing with any of these children or refugees. Inshallah, for example, means God willing. So, are we going to the store? Inshallah, God willing, if God wills it. Bakhair is another term that you might be hearing, which also means with goodness from God. So are we going to the store? Bakhair, we will, with goodness from God. And then when you're saying goodbye to someone, you'll hear them say Khuda Hafiz, which is usually used as goodbye, and it means may God protect you. So these religious idioms are often used within our speech, within our code of everything that we do. The values of modesty in dress, behavior, and speech also come from the faith. And again, I'll go more into that a little bit later. Community is the third major value and belief of Afghans. While mainstream American culture is often an individualistic society, they emphasize being an individual, making your own decisions and own choices in your own vacuum. The Afghan one is fully based on the importance of community and the village. Dependence on one's family, beliefs, and communities is a central aspect of Afghan culture. Pride in your culture, heritage, and nation are ingrained within the community values of Afghans. So it's important, again, to afford these children respect and collaboration as part of a community rather than forcing or enacting regulations upon them. When they ask for something, saying no right away is seen as hostile, is seen as rude, and is seen as, honestly speaking, mean. So it's important to allow them a chance to give feedback and collaborate with you on whatever you might be wanting to change. The third element of culture for Afghans is Islam, is religion. 99% of the Afghanistan is Muslim. Between 70 to 85% of them are Sunni Muslim, with the rest of them being Shia Muslim. There are thousands of Afghan Hindus and Sikhs, but again, they're in the minority compared to the Muslim population. There are some Christians, and then we had one last person who was Jewish person who was staying in Afghanistan. He was maintaining the last standing synagogue, but with the Taliban coming in, he actually left, sadly. And it was very sad, and I'm a practicing Muslim myself, but it was very sad to see that he left. It was, and I hope that one day he can return. What is Islam for anybody who might not be familiar with it? It's an Abrahamic monotheistic religion that believes that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the messenger of God. It's the world's second largest faith group with almost 2 billion faithful. Explaining it a little further, the central aspect of Islam is submission to God. God is seen as merciful, beneficent, and all-knowing, and those who follow Islam are called Muslims. Mosques or masjids are where Muslims go to pray. The Quran is the major holy text of Islam. There's Sunni Muslims, and they make up almost 90% of the world's Muslim population, and then there's Shia Muslims, which are about 10% of the world's Muslim population. Majority of them are in Iran, Iraq, and there's some in Syria as well. And Afghanistan has a sizable population, but not compared to those other places. There's 5 pillars of Islam which are important. There's a testimony of faith, which you believe, you declare belief in one God, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the final messenger of God. Afghans will often call God Allah or Khuda. If you're discussing Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, it's important to say peace be upon him to make a connection with the youth that you're speaking to. Even if you're not Muslim yourself, even if you might not even believe in anything, you know what I mean? It's still important to make that connection with that child because of how much Afghan culture reveres God and the Prophet, peace be upon him. It's important to say, to make those connections, to create some goodwill between you and the child. If you say peace be upon him, it will give them a lot of it'll just connect them with you a little bit further. If you notice, I write SWS, which is the Arabic short form of how to say peace be upon him. And as you notice, even when I'm writing, I can't write it without writing that. So that's how important it is for us. The second pillar of Islam is prayer. It's mandatory for a Muslim to pray 5 times a day. There's dawn, noon, afternoon, sunset, and evening prayers. You pray facing Mecca on a clean surface after ritual ablution or cleaning, which is called wudu. Parts of the prayer can be recited out loud when in congregation, and other parts are recited to yourself. For women, hair, arms, legs need to be covered, and men must wear pants longer than their knees and are encouraged also to cover their heads. There's also Jummah prayer or Friday prayers. Jummah literally translates to Friday. They're obligatory for Muslim men, and communal prayer in congregations preferred at a mosque. And then so for praying in congregation is always preferred. So if the youth would like to pray together in a communal location, this must be allowed, as it encourages and fosters community and spiritual happiness for the children. It makes them feel as though they're not others. They're feeling like they have a community there with them. Ablution or wudu requires ritual cleaning of their face, arms, feet, mouth, and nostrils. And then if an individual has used the bathroom to relieve themselves prior, they're also required to rinse themselves with water. It would be helpful if the bathrooms wherever these children or individuals are performing ablution had some small empty watering cans or empty water bottles available to help facilitate the rinsing of their bodies. It just so everybody knows, Allahu Akbar is recited several times during the prayer, and it might even be said out loud. And we see that in modern movies, media. That's always associated with fear, but it's not fear. It's actually a very peaceful element of prayer, and it just means God is the greatest. So if you hear that, know that there's some sort of prayer going on. It literally translates to God is the greatest. Please use Google, or there's some apps to help find some most up-to-date prayer times for your locality to help the youth. The last three are not as pertinent to this situation, but there's zakat, which is mandatory almsgiving or giving to those in need, so charity. The fourth one is what Afghans say roza, which is fasting. You fast from dawn till dusk in the holy month of Ramadan, which is not going to be happening for a few months, so we don't need to focus too much on that right now. And then there's the Hajj, which is making pilgrimage to Mecca at least once during a person's lifetime, if you're able to do it financially and physically. Things that you need to remember is that if it's possible, to give each child the option to have a copy of the Quran, as well as a prayer mat that they can keep for themselves. Please ensure that when you're handling the Quran, that you handle it with care. I can't emphasize how important the Quran is to Afghan culture. I remember growing up, we would wrap it in a cloth and put it in the highest location possible. And that's very, very much Afghan culture. And so if anybody's, it's not a normal, for them, it's not a normal book that you can just throw around. So if they see anybody mishandling the Quran, it will be seen as it'll just be seen as a very traumatic experience. They're already in a foreign country. They're already hearing a foreign language. And then if they see the Quran treated with carelessness in their eyes, it's very hard to recover from that. Please allow the children, if you can, to pray in congregation if they choose to do so. And I'm making assumptions, by the way. I don't know if you're allowing it or not allowing it. I'm just saying, in general, this would be what would be recommended from me. If a child would like to attend Friday prayer at a mosque, if you could try to facilitate that. Islamic values often impact how a child chooses to dress, eat, interact with others, and I'll speak more on that later, but know that this is what's informing much of their behaviors. If you can provide a bidet, like I said earlier, an empty water bottle or small watering can to allow for complete ablution. And if you're facilitating a visit to the mosque, it's important to find out the sect of Islam that the child practices, whether they're Shia or Sunni, as well as the mosque, because you want to mitigate any risks upon their arrival. You don't want to cause any more trauma. The fourth aspect of culture for Afghans is diet and food preparation. Everyone in Afghanistan eats only halal or zabiha food. This means that the meat was slaughtered in accordance to Islamic law. The food does not contain any alcohol or any product that may contain pork. If there's absolutely no way to provide halal meat, then it would be acceptable to offer fish or vegetarian dishes, but it would be nice if they did have the option of halal meat. And I think you guys know about that one. Rice is another important part of Afghan cuisine. If you want to, I'm giving you these little tidbits in Farsi or Dari, so that or Pashto, that you can maybe make some connections with them. For example, white rice is called chalao. It's just basically basmati rice steam cooked. Palau is basmati rice steam cooked in the juice of a meat broth. Tea is a compulsory part of many Afghan days. So green or black tea steeped with crushed cardamom. And so, not to make you hungry, but I'm going to be biased and say Afghan food's most likely the best food in the whole world. And it's just so delicious. And if you haven't had any, please order some from Uber Eats. The large majority of Afghans do not eat pork and do not drink alcohol. It's extremely important to avoid both alcohol and pork in any food products that you give to the youth. Pork gelatin can be found in certain candies and puddings. And these are things that, I had to learn the hard way growing up, as an immigrant. But it's things that, as adults, if we're in charge of children, and if we know better, then we can do better. Alcohol is also sometimes used to deglaze a pan, in cooking methods. So those are certain things that we can try to avoid, like wine. They use wine to deglaze pans sometimes. While some Afghans use cutlery to eat, forks, spoons, knives, there are times where they prefer to use their hands. So if you see that, know that it's very much within the cultural norms of Afghans. Then there's dress and appearance, which is the fifth element of culture. I'm just seeing my time. Okay. Much of the dress and appearance of Afghans and Afghanistan is rooted in Islam. Modesty is of the utmost importance. So both genders are encouraged to wear loose-fitting covered clothes. Men are encouraged to have well-groomed beards and a small head covering, while women are encouraged to wear headscarves. As there are a large number of nomadic tribes in Afghanistan, their body art looks different than those who live in the city. Nomadic women often have tattoos on their faces that indicate their tribe and their history. In big city, women in the past have had in the big city, women in the, cutting out. Okay, sorry, my internet cut out. In the big city, women in the past have been more Western in dress. However, with the coming of the Taliban, of course, this has changed. And so this is just some pictures of traditional Afghan clothes, and in her background is Afghanistan, beautiful Afghanistan. Another major aspect of culture is how the population interacts with one another. So this is the sixth element of Afghan culture, which is social relationships. Afghan culture is highly social. Hosting, hospitality, and having guests is a very important and central tenet of the culture. It's called Mehman Nawazi. Weddings, dinner parties, get-togethers are often, highly anticipated and fun events full of good food, music, and dancing. And again, the vast majority of these get-togethers are segregated by gender unless within a same family event. So there's definitely dancing, but then the dancing is done either within your family or within individuals who are of the same gender as you. And then another aspect of social relationships is names. Birthdays are never straightforward. Most Afghans really don't know their birthdays unless, they were living in the city and they had to register for something.
Dr. Simon, I think there were some questions or people have asked, or maybe, so I don't know if you have a question, maybe you can post, or if you have, just raise hands and we can answer it. I don't know if somebody was willing to speak or ask question. No, okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll try to slow down a little bit. So names, birthdays are never straightforward. A person's name, might say Abdul Wahid, but, because it means servant of, it's a name of God. And so you don't call them that, you say servant of a certain name of God. And so you don't actually call them by their full name, you would call them Wahid. And then birthdays as well are, never registered, not never registered, they're often not registered. So a lot of children might not actually know their exact birthdays. For example, in my day, when you were born, your birthday will be written in a Quran, placed on a shelf. Go ahead. Hello? Okay. Names and birthdays are never really straightforward. So it's important to ask the child, what would you like for me to call you? What is your name? Even whatever name is written on their document might not actually be the name they want to be called. So it's important to ask that as well. Another aspect of social relationships is the concept of respect. It's really important within a society. Hierarchy exists between those in leadership roles, family status, age, wisdom, and religious status. Many nonverbal elements of respect exist. For example, lowering your eyes or your gaze, hand on your chest when you're speaking. And then when Afghans are asked to, when Afghans are asked to accept food or help, societal cultural norms state that you must always say no. For example, you're offering food to somebody, you always say no, thank you. Even if you're starving and you haven't eaten for the last 10 hours and you're so hungry, you have to say no. And this is a central aspect of being a child. Before you go to anybody's house, your mom tells you, no matter what they ask you, you say no, thank you first. And so even if this poor child is starving, you have to say no. First you say no. There's sometimes when you even say no the second time, and then the third time you accept graciously. So know that when you first ask any of these children to accept something that you're giving them, whether it's a favor, whether it's food, whether it's some sort of help, they're taught to say no first, always, because they don't want to be rude. And so you can ask again and prod again, and then hopefully they'll accept from you. And it's not them being rude to you, it's them being respectful of you and of your status. This is also true the other way around. So if they ask you something and you say no right away, that's seen as extremely hostile. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier as well. And so before just saying no right out, straightforward and out, it's important to kind of explain to them why the answer is no. Let's talk about it. Because if you just say no, straight out, it might offend them and might make them feel, a little bit weak. There's also aspects of greetings and goodbyes. So when Afghans greet each other with the same gender, they are kissing on the cheeks. And then there's also very drawn out goodbyes, which you might have noticed with the kids that you're working with. Saying goodbye takes forever. And then how you greet someone is you say salam. Some differences, again, this is so generalized, so please keep that in mind when you're reading this. It's so important to note that most of this stuff is generalized, and you have to apply it to the specific situations. For males, they're usually the communicators in the family unit with the official outside world. Depending on their individual family culture, they'll avoid direct eye contact or make intense eye contact. So it's one or the other. They're either going to be staring directly into your eyes to show respect, or they're going to not be looking at you. And then they might also not be comfortable shaking hands with the opposite gender. So please keep that in mind. And for females, they're often the socializers within known family units. They do not like to engage in direct eye contact with those of the opposite gender, and they most likely will not want to shake hands with those of the opposite gender. The seventh element of culture is traditions and customs. Afghanistan's traditional celebrations and holidays are rooted in Islam and pre-Islamic traditions. We have Nowruz, which is a celebrating of the first day of spring, and it's also the Persian or Afghan New Year. We have Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr, which are two of the most important days for Muslim, celebrations. Independence Day, which is August 19th, which is the day that Afghans celebrate their independence from the British. Then there's Ramadan, which is the Islamic holy month, and then there's also Ashura. Again, speaking about hospitality again, which is another traditional tradition and custom that's really important for Afghans, is that, sorry, I was reading the questions. One's guest must always feel welcome, fed, comfortable, and happy, no matter what. Oftentimes, a person will forgo their own meal so that their guests can eat their fill. When you watch videos of people traveling to Afghanistan, or if you've ever had the opportunity to go to Afghanistan and you go to the most remote village where they have no food and they're so hungry, that family will give you their food before they eat themselves, and they will starve for the day, because that's how important guests are in the Afghan culture. A very popular Afghan saying is that a guest is a gift from God. And so this is, in Afghanistan, this is how they would eat sometimes. On the floor, they would have it spread out, and everyone would be eating in a communal way like this. This is a family unit, but this would, times this by 10 or, however many when you're hosting people. Honor and shame is another important concept of traditions and customs of Afghans. It's a very pervasive aspect of Afghan culture, given that the family is a central aspect of life. Bringing honor and shame can make or break an individual's circumstances in life. It's important to never speak to the youth in an admonishing tone in front of their peers. If you have something that you need to correct, if you could please take them aside and not do that in front of other kids. It really brings a sense of shame to them. And again, that shame is such a pervasive aspect of the culture that you don't want to do that to them. It'll cause much more trauma. If you praise the youth, alternatively, if you praise the youth publicly or to their families, it will create a bond and increase their self-worth considerably. So if you're speaking to their families back home, if you can praise something that they did or speak well of them, it will cause a boost of happiness for them, and it will bring honor to their family. So this is something that you can do to create connections. Marriages and weddings are another important part of Afghan culture. Marriages can occur due to love, convenience, or they're arranged by the parents of the two individuals. Weddings are usually very large celebrations full of dancing, food, and lots of gold jewelry. Within Afghanistan, weddings are segregated by gender, and dancing does not happen in front of non-family opposite gender individuals. Again, if you've ever attended an Afghan wedding in the United States, it might differ because the culture is different here as it is over there. Education and the desire for it are an all-encompassing concept of Afghan culture and tradition and culture. Many youth dream about going to school, getting a good job, and providing for their families. Unfortunately, there's still a very low rate of literacy amongst Afghans. And so going to school is such a coveted concept for both males and females. If you've ever spoken to, like, what's your dream? You ask a child this, go to school. If you ask a mother or father, what's your dream? For my child to go to school and to, get educated. And it gives me goosebumps to think about how much they crave education, how much they crave to learn and to contribute to society. Another aspect of traditions and customs is music. Music is such an important aspect of Afghan culture. I've listed a few, popular Afghan singers. Some of them are older, some of them are newer, and there's a large list of them as well. There's Pashto singers, there's Dari singers, and it's a very important aspect of the culture, and it can bring them some sort of joy as well and familiarity. So if there's a way to offer them an ability to listen to this music, please, if you could provide it. Television and movies, Afghan TV stations can be found via YouTube right now. So news stations and things like that can be found via YouTube. Older shows are also found on YouTube. There's Bollywood as well, a huge culture of Bollywood. I'm sure you've noticed that as well. And then the Afghans love their Turkish dramas. They're dubbed obviously, but they love those Turkish dramas. Family structure. A lot of this is repeating what I said earlier, but this is the 8th element of the culture for Afghans. Family in Afghanistan is often patriarchal. The father is the head of the household, and the mother is in charge of the homemaking. The grandfather or the eldest living male uncle is the patriarch of the larger family structure. Children in Afghan culture are seen as an extension of their parents in the larger family systems, which again ties right back into the concept of honor and shame. Children are often reminded that they are to only speak when they're spoken to, and but at the same time, they're empowered at a very early age to provide, to work. And so at the same time as that they are very humble and very shy when they're interacting with adults and those in power, at this very same time, simultaneously, they're self-confident, self-assured, and they know what they want, because from a very young age, they've either had to provide for their families, they've been working, they've had to deal with the harsh realities of the world. A 5-year-old in Afghanistan is very different than my 5-year-old at home. It's very different. So speaking about women's rights a little bit, and the women in Afghanistan, Afghanistan secured the women's right to vote prior to both the United States and the United Kingdom. It's still been a very male-dominated society, no matter what the regime was in power. So life in Kabul, which is the capital, and other urban cities is very different for women than life in the rural parts of the country. This is not including what's going on right now with the Taliban in power. So I'm talking about pre-Taliban. Education for girls and women was always lacking. However, again, the gap widened during the Taliban. And Afghanistan does boast, however, female pilots, military leaders, countless doctors, my own parents' doctors, nurses, teachers, scientists, police officers, members of parliament. And so they do exist, or they did exist, unfortunately. The 9th element of culture for Afghans is the view of time. The Afghan view of time is very much centered around the concept of Islam's view of time. So it's religious again. This world is temporary, and the next world, which is the hereafter, is the permanent world. And so you have to living your life in accordance to faith principles in order to attain a good afterlife is seen as really important. That's why prayer is important for these children. That's why the Quran is so important for these children. Spirituality is such an important aspect of Afghan culture, and it gives them an understanding that despite whatever trauma and hardship they're going through now, they're looking forward to, there will be peace at the end of this somehow. And also there's just very little sense of urgency when time is involved. Afghans are notoriously late for everything, because just that has nothing to do with anything besides that's just our culture. Leisure and recreation. So you see the kiddos in this picture, they're playing the carom board, which can be found on Amazon, which can be found, this is a larger one that they're playing, but you can find small ones that you can play with on Amazon, and I think there was one on Kohl's, and you can totally get this for them and they will enjoy playing with it, and this is part of their recreation and leisure activities. Kite flying, buzkashi, which is like polo, but instead of a ball, there's a goat. There's soccer, cricket, playing cards, wrestling, taekwondo, and reading in more literate areas and listening to music are some of the leisure and recreational activity that can provide these children with some sort of fun. And then trauma. Excuse me. So this is the harder part of the presentation, which is a little bit more difficult. So despite many beautiful aspects of Afghan culture, the reality of war and foreign factions invading has led to multiple layers of multifaceted trauma for these youth. You need to expect high rates of depression. You need to expect high rates of PTSD and anxiety. Many of the youth might feel triggered and appear aggressive upon arrival. Most of these unaccompanied children have arrived in the United States through a traumatic means, and as such, they need trauma-informed care and leniency when they present with distrust or an unwillingness to cooperate. Don't take it personally. Don't get offended by their reaction. They have been through an immense amount of trauma to get here. They might not exhibit overt symptoms of PTSD or depression and anxiety, but sometimes a headache or another somatic symptom, which is a physical symptom, is an indication of a mental health illness or mental illness. It's important that we note that the mistrust is rooted in years and years of bombing and drones and so much activity that's happened in Afghanistan that's surrounding the war society. And so it's not that they don't trust you specifically, it's that they don't trust anything right now. They don't know where to trust. And so some of these tips that I've been giving you so far, and I know I've been speaking so fast and I've gotten that feedback already, and I'm so sorry. All of these tips are to try to create some sort of a bond, to create some sort of a relationship with you and the child where that mistrust can be lessened slowly and over time. Afghans raise their children in a village, like a village mentality, and so the village raises your child. And so in this case, because the village of Afghanistan within Afghanistan is missing, that you rely on the Afghan diaspora community to help with their needs, whether it's through communication, field trips, or virtual calls. Allow the Afghan community to help step in and provide that village for them, whether it's just to speak for a couple of hours a week, things like that. And if it's possible, to allow that they're able to communicate with their loved ones whenever possible. And I know actually Heartland is trying and has done that very well. So I appreciate that. And then there's certain questions that you can ask yourself. Am I, as a provider, am I assuming negative things about this child based on my own preconceived notions, based on your own culture, based on your own understanding, based on whatever the media has fed you until this point? Am I assuming negative things, or am I coming to this child with a clean, open type of understanding? Can I do more to help them feel at ease and welcome in this environment? Based on some of the things that I mentioned earlier. Is my posture, demeanor, or eye contact threatening or offensive to this child? You can ask these 3 questions of yourself whenever you're interacting with these children. And sometimes it's hard to, look at our own actions, but it's so important because it will develop that relationship for you. So I'm going to just do a quick lightning round of do's and don'ts. Like, just don't call them Afghanis, please. That's the name of a currency. That's the name of the money. They're called Afghans. Don't ask them what their political views on the United States is. It'll make them feel unsafe and cornered, and they might wonder, is this going to be the means for me to be deported out of here? Do let them cry or talk to you, even when you're not able to understand. Don't assume that because a female youth wants modest clothing or covered hair that she's oppressed. Allow her the freedom to make her own choices. Don't expect them to understand American norms and behavior or etiquette. For example, like I mentioned earlier, eating with cutlery, or if they don't know the idioms of saying please after they ask for something, can I please do this? That doesn't exist in Afghan culture. You say thank you at the end, but the please is, and the demeanor of which you ask. Do remain open-minded and free to listen, especially if there's a possibility that they're coming from a minority faction in Afghanistan, whether that's gender, race, religion, or sexual orientation. Don't discuss discuss your own faith to them. It might trigger their PTSD. plus it's kind of awkward, like you don't want to, I want you to, I've heard this actually happening, not here. I've heard that, that there have been people who have proselytized to them that, I want you to become Christian, or I want you to accept Jesus. And that's really triggered them because they realize they're not safe in this environment. Maybe that they have to accept that faith to be able to stay. Don't ask them about their political views about those in Afghanistan either. So earlier was don't ask them about American political views. Don't ask them about Afghan political views either. It's all triggering. Do treat them with respect, kindness, and empathy. I don't know. Do I have time? There's a 5-minute video of, to give you a little glimpse into the culture of Afghanistan, of how much can $10 get you in Afghanistan, to understand where these kids are coming from. What do you think, Sister Sahira, or Brother Irshad? Do you think we should do question and answer, or do the video, or I can just send this link afterwards?
Maybe just send the link
Yeah.
so that you can take some Q&As.
Perfect. I'm so sorry that I'm speaking so fast, but I had to get it all. We can do Q&A. And that's my email address in case you have any other questions.
We don't have any questions on the chat box. I've been monitoring it. So if you want to go ahead and post your questions in the chat, or if you have, if you can raise your hand.
Okay, so I'm seeing some questions to me. Is it safe to assume that if a female removes her head covering in front of male staff, that she's comfortable or feels at ease? It honestly depends on their age, first of all. If they're very young, they are, sorry, I just saw raised hands as well. If they're very young, then it would be that's how they're, it's not a mandatory thing when you're very young to wear a head covering. So if they're removing it in front of you, they do feel at ease. They kind of feel like they're in a comfortable environment. If they're older, then again, they're just feeling comfortable. It's their choice. Again, we want to make sure that head coverings, modesty, clothing remains the choice of the child, whether they want to put it on or whether they want to take it off. This is not, we're not trying to, re-traumatize them here by taking the choice away from them. And then go ahead. I think, how do I see everybody's stuff? Let me stop.
Vanya, go ahead. Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Azar, for just a great presentation. My question is, we see a lot of kind of interpersonal conflicts between themselves and a lot of physical conflicts between themselves. And so from like the trauma perspective, do you have any tips for us on how we can approach those situations, and anything that you feel like would be helpful in terms of when we talk to them, or how we approach those situations?
Sure. So keeping in mind all of that ethnic background stuff that I told you about, how there's different ethnicities and there's so many different issues that are within those ethnic minority groups, and then the ethnic majority groups. There's a lot of trauma between those people, not necessarily themselves individually, but as within their ethnic factions that they come from. Trauma-informed care is, extremely important. And even if for those who don't have a mental health background, there's, psychological first aid or mental health first aid, which I think, I'm sure you've done and you've taken. That's really important for your staff to, take part in. Second of all, it's important to let them get separated. If there's issues that are, turning physical, you want to separate them because, sorry, there's somebody was saying something. You want to separate them, and then you also want to provide them access to care providers within their own language, within their own, cultural, understanding. So then, if you have, for example, a list of support staff or advocates, you reach out to them, because there's no way that you, Vanya, can really solve this problem. There's no way for you to solve the problem, but what can happen is that support staff or that advocate or that village member in the community can help them understand that this is not the way things happen here. Here, we have to remain together. We have to remain united. This is the reason we left Afghanistan. This is the reason we, left, because of these foreign issues, because of these warring ethnic backgrounds and tribal issues. We don't have that here. Here we are one people and we're united. But for you to say that will kind of seem disingenuous. So it's really important to lean on your community. It's really important to lean on the providers. And then it's also really important to lean on faith. It's really important to bring faith. If you can bring faith into it, I know it's difficult, again, for somebody who's not Muslim to do that. But if there's a way that you can, remember what your faith says, because Islam really does teach, brotherhood and sisterhood. It really does. There's nobody who's better than the other in Islam. The only way that you're better is if you're a more pious individual. So reminding them of these central Islamic tenets can also help ground them, and until you can get them to the next provider in that moment, in that heat of the moment. And then I can help you specifically as well offline.
Thank you.
I think Carmen has a question.
You're on mute, Carmen. Hi.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Dr. Asar, for this opportunity to learn more about your culture. I am a clinical psychologist, but I'm currently providing spiritual care for the children at the 4 Heartland shelters here in Chicago. And my question to you is, what is the primary recommendation that you have for us in providing spiritual care services?
Can you explain to me what your spiritual care services entail?
Well, we speak about faith, and you just mentioned earlier to Vanya the importance of faith in the religion. And my question again is just, what would be the recommendation to you that can make us feel welcome to them in a respectful way?
Absolutely. Well, getting yourself more familiarized with the faith, again, that's me making a large assumption that you're not Muslim, but if you are, I apologize, but if you're not, then getting yourself really, what I gave earlier was such a large, brief overview of like the faith, but there's so many amazing aspects of the religion that are spiritual. Afghans are a very spiritual people. They're not very dogmatic. Like, it's very, very spiritual people. We have these celebrations that are rooted in spirituality. We celebrate the birth of the Prophet, peace be upon him. We have, so many gatherings where, we're remembering the names of of God. And these are these little certain specific things that can help you understand the faith, and also help you understand how to support them in a spiritual way. There's dogma, and then there's, spirituality. And so helping understand the spiritual aspects of the faith, and the peaceful aspects of the faith, and reminding them of those things. And then also, honestly, getting yourself connected with a Muslim provider would really be helpful. Whether it's an imam or a spiritual counselor, I'm sure CIGC has a large list of amazing chaplains that you can get in touch with that can help you with that spiritually informed care, is what you're really doing, is, and I think it's like I was telling Vanya earlier, using the central aspects of faith, these central tenets of faith, which is peace, which is solidarity, which is, hope. It's so important to use those, because those are the biggest tools you'll have in your toolbox. Afghans are such a religious people. The religion is really the central aspect of the majority of the culture. Whether the person's even practicing or not, the dogmatic forms of the faith, like the prayer and all those things, still in their culture and their speech and in their worldview, the faith and the spirituality is so central. So again, getting yourself connected with a provider locally would be so helpful. And then getting that knowledge on your own as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. There was somebody who wrote in my private direct. Do you have any accurate resources that you would recommend to learn more about the culture, like books and media? Yes, if you don't mind emailing me, and I can send that out to you. Go ahead. Sorry, brother Rashad.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions from Tom. I think he brought it up in our discussion as well. As there are kids who are Shia and Sunni backgrounds. So are they need to be served in a different mosque? And then the follow-up question to that is it appropriate to ask a child if they are Shia or Sunni?
I mean, I'm going to let you answer the Chicago-based question because you know more than I do, obviously. But it is appropriate if it pertains to, like, I don't want you to go to a random Afghan refugee that you're meeting who's resettled in your city and asking them, "Are you Sunni or Shia?" That's not appropriate. Is it appropriate to ask a child that you're trying to serve? Yes, that is appropriate. It helps them understand, because sometimes there has been religious persecution in Afghanistan. This is something that we have to, come to terms with. It has happened, it does happen. And so taking them to a majority, and although in the United States, obviously this is not, it's not very, prevalent, but it might trigger a child who's Shia, for example, going into a Sunni mosque, because there's very slight differences in the way that they pray. But it still might trigger their trauma responses based on whatever might have happened. Just recently, there was a bombing, in Afghanistan last week at a primarily Shia mosque, and so many children, so many people were killed. And again, I'm coming from a Sunni Muslim background myself, but I can understand and accept the biases that Sunni Muslims might have towards Shia Muslims. And so it's important for trauma-informed care specifically, that you ask a child where they would feel more comfortable. Will they be ostracized in the Sunni mosque? Of course not. Of course, it most likely will not happen, but still you don't want to take the chance of re-traumatizing the child. But again, this is not an appropriate question to ask somebody that you meet on the street. Absolutely not. That would be very strange and off-putting, and it would cause, again, more distrust. But for the sake of specifically taking them to a mosque, in my opinion, it is important. But Brother Irshad, you can answer more specifically about Chicago.
Sure. So, Tom, I think we need to figure out how many are the Shia background. So we can certainly, there are mosques that do serve the Shia community as well. We do have their contact. So let's figure out and take this offline and see how many, and then we can work out with their leadership as well to see how we can address that. I don't think there's that many, and maybe Dr. Saman can. Is it regionalized? I mean, is it fair to accept, meaning Dari speaking is all, maybe Shia background? Is that?
No. I mean, I'm Dari speaking, and I'm Sunni Muslim. So definitely you can't tie it to that way. There's certain ethnicities within Afghanistan, like the Hazara population, that are primarily Shia Muslims, but it doesn't really, you can't tie it like that either. Okay. There are actually even some Pashtuns who are Shia. So you just never know. A large number of people who did escaped because of the persecution they were facing in the hands of the Taliban, who were persecuting them based on their faith. And so you have to take into account that as well, that maybe some of these children who have escaped and have taken the risk to leave on their own, they might also be coming from a minority culture, minority religion, some sort of minority background. So it's definitely, I mean, I don't know the makeup, you all might know the makeup much better than I would. Those of you who are working at Heartland or at the shelters, or, as first providers, the makeup much better than I do, because I'm not privy to that information. However, a large assumption that I'm going to make is that there is a good number of them who are coming from some sort of a minority background, whether it's, again, gender, religion, sexual orientation, something of those, ethnicity. And then, so that's where I'm seeing. And there's another question here. Sorry, is that okay if I go to the next question?
Yeah.
Somebody said, if you're speaking, in the rare occasion, Alberto said, in the rare occasion, we might have to speak to a parent, especially a mother. Is there a particular title or greeting we should use to begin the call? You start the call, it says salam, and salam is the peace, hello. You can say salamu alaikum, but it's much, Afghans generally, we don't say that whole phrase, we just say salam. And then you can call her khanum, which is a difficult a sound to make. You can say salam khanum. It's a kha sound, which is a KH. You can say khanum, I guess. And that's a way of showing respect and respect to her. Engaging in different interfaith activities with the youth. Right now, I would avoid all sorts of interfaith activities. This is not the time to be in, you know, once they're out in society and into communities and resettled and with, you know, their families or their sponsors, that's a whole different situation. But right now, interfaith activities are really, right now, these kids are coming from so much trauma, and so many issues that getting them comfortable, getting them settled, getting them to feel safe is more important than any sort of discussions about other faiths at this point in time. Eventually, yes, you know, culturalizing them to the society here is important. But for now, because of their high trauma responses, which again, you all know better than I do because you're dealing with them, you know, one-on-one directly, because of their high level of trauma responses, it's really important to respect that boundary for them right now. Unless they're asking you, of course, unless a child specifically asks questions, and then at that point, of course, you should answer. And then, sorry. Do you have any other questions that were given to you, Brother Rashad? I'm trying to see.
No, I don't see any more questions. I think
To wrap the Quran, sorry, I just saw, to wrap the Quran, would you suggest a special cloth? This is an Afghan cloth, it's just a clean cloth, just a clean cloth to cover it with. Again, this is very much just an Afghan-centric cultural thing where we wrap the Quran in a cloth just to keep it clean, just so it doesn't get dirty. The Quran is revered like so highly, and so treating it with respect is very important for the children, and actually build goodwill between you and them as well. And then I think that's the only question. Let me see.
Sister Saira had a hand up.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about the Quran and the cloth. Islamically, a lot of people do ablution before touching the Quran, and therefore, when you're touching the Quran with something unclean with your hands, if they're not washed or cleaned, or to avoid that, a lot of people just use a cloth, and it's also a sign of respect. So when I was there speaking to some of the kids, this is something that a couple of the kids did bring up. So maybe that's something that we want to think about. To just deal with the Quran when we are picking it up and keeping it, just doing it with respect, cloth or otherwise, but just to have respect to the book. I think it means a lot to the kids. That is the one thing that I noticed that I wanted to share.
Thank you. First-hand experiences are so important.
So I don't see any other questions in the chat. I don't know if you have any questions come to you directly, but I don't see anything. Do you want to make a few closing comments, and then we will wrap this meeting up, Dr. Summon?
Sure. I'm going to just drop my email address in the chat box because I'm getting some stuff privately, but I really have to run. So please just email me if you have any other further questions, or Sister Sahira, who organized this with such last minute notice. And I appreciate it because I think it's so important. I want you all to know, including CIJC, that I'm so appreciative of what you're doing for these Afghan youth. It warms my heart to see such a large collaboration of not only mosques, but of providers, of non-Muslims come together and to really care about how to provide the most appropriate care for these children. They came from so much trauma. They came from so much turmoil and so much sadness that whether or not they realize it right now, eventually, hopefully it will be realized that there are people out there who care for them and to want to see them be successful. And providing messages of hope is so important for these children, because at this point, some of them might be feeling completely hopeless. So I appreciate the fact that there are Muslims being allowed to come in and speak to them, and I appreciate the transparency and the willingness to learn. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Summon, for your presentation and your insight. This presentation will be is recorded and it will be shared. And then also, if you have any further questions, please reach out to Dr. Summon, as her email is on the chat, or to CRGC or Sister Saira. So thank you again, everybody, for joining, and I will let Sister Saira do some closing comments.
So first of all, I just wanted to thank Maria, thank Dr. Saman, of course, Azhar, for coming last minute and doing this for all of us. Appreciate it very much. I want to thank each and every one of you here for the giving the time to try to understand. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I was very appreciative of the efforts being made by Heartland Alliance to try to understand the culture and trying to do whatever is needed to help these kids through get through this difficult time. And thank you so much. And we will be following this up with a part 2 presentation in a couple of weeks. So we've recorded this, we will share this with you, and we will of course be following this up with part 2 of the presentation based on the follow-up from today. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you.